Seaside Chats with Kenneth Arthur. We're previewing the Seahawks and the Jets in Week 4, and the biggest news, I guess, from the Seahawks offensive standpoint in terms of injury, well, maybe not the biggest, with Jimmy Graham popping his back in there once again and saying, hey, look at me, I can get hurt. But we'll see what happens there. No offense to Jimmy Graham. We hope the best, and we hope for the best. But Thomas Rawls, some sort of broken bone or hairline fracture in his leg. Doesn't really matter the details to a fan such as myself and yourself for the most part to know which is which. You just want to know how long. Well, quote unquote, a few weeks per Pete Carroll that Thomas Rawls will be out, giving Christine Michael even more opportunities to continue his quote-unquote awakening. This season in 2016, Michael, of course, the second-round pick by the Seahawks in 2013, behind Marshawn Lynch, a lot of high expectations that it would be like, whatever you want to call it, fire and ice, thunder and lightning, peanut butter and jelly, bananas and apples, bananas and pajamas. That's a better one. A black and white cookie, maybe a s'mores, rice with butter. I don't know. I'm just off track and thinking about food. It is 12:15 when I'm recording this, so could eat. That didn't happen. Christine Michael, of course, struggled in 2013 and 2014, and then surprisingly traded to the Dallas Cowboys before the 2015 season. A lot of people looking at that Cowboys offensive line and saying, man, Michael's going to just explode with DeMarco Murray now in Philadelphia. He's going to be, he's eventually not going to take long for him to win the starting job from Darren McFadden. That didn't happen. McFadden barely rushes for 1,000 yards. Christine Michael released, and he goes to the Washington Redskins for a little bit, and then picked up off of waivers when Thomas Rawls, gets injured. So Thomas Rawls, Christine Michael owes Thomas Rawls at least 3 gold chains because he has given him opportunities in Seattle twice now. First at the end of last season to come back, and he does pretty well in those games that he is filling in for Rawls with. Actually, the Seahawks did not opt to just retain Rawls as a restricted free agent. They let him go. He could have signed anywhere, but because he wasn't a hot commodity, being basically let go by 3 teams the season before, he is able to be re-signed a year later on a 1-year deal. And Christine Michael, going into camp as a guy that was not guaranteed a job, but because Rawls was out, he got a lot of opportunities. Because C.J. Prosise, the rookie third-round pick, was hurt for most of camp, and again, he got a lot more opportunities. The fact that Alex Collins wasn't necessarily lighting the world on fire, I think he dealt with a few minor injuries in training camp. He got a lot more opportunities. Zach Brooks didn't really do anything of note, and he got hurt. So really it was just Christine Michael for all of training camp and preseason, and then he comes into the season. And right now through 3 games, Christine Michael is 45 carries for 232 yards, 2 touchdowns, 5.2 yards per carry. And it looks like going into this week's game against the Jets will, be the number 1 running back, and will be the number 1 running back when they come back from their bye week. As long as he doesn't get injured, it's going to be the Christine Michael show. In Week 1, he had 15 carries for 66 yards. In Week 2, he had 10 carries for 60 yards. And then in his, most carries of the season against the 49ers last weekend, 20 carries for 106 yards and 2 touchdowns, the first 2 touchdowns of his career. And they came early, so he just got those out of the way really early. And now we're looking at Christine Michael as, one of the most productive running backs in the NFL. If you look at the leaders this season, he's only 15th in carries, or tied for 14th in carries with Isaiah Crowell. But above all else, the 5.2 yards per carry, and you'd say that that's pretty good. Though I think you have to caution yourself to see what's going to happen when Christine Michael starts to move up the charts in terms of carries. There isn't anybody, he's got 45 carries, and that's anybody that has more than 45 carries. The leaders in yards per carry are David Johnson of Arizona at 4.6 and LaShawn McCoy in Buffalo at 4.7. Everyone else pretty much is at 4 or below. LeGarrette Blount, the AFC Offensive Player of the Month last month, he had 75 carries for 298 yards and 4 touchdowns, 4 yards per carry. But for the most part, once you start carrying the ball more, as expected, the yards per carry often go down. And in Kristen Michael's range of carries, you've got Crowell, who's averaging 6.1 yards per carry. So before you get too excited about Kristen Michael, just in terms of productivity, remember that the Browns running back, Crowell, he's got the same number of carries, but he's got more yards. He's got almost a full more yard per carry. A lot of that coming on an 85-yard carry, but still, and he's got 91.3 yards per game. If you look at Eddie Lacy, who's got 43 carries for the Green Bay Packers, he's averaging 5 yards per carry. Devonta Freeman of the Falcons has 42 carries, and he's averaging 6.3 yards per carry. DeMarco Murray in Tennessee now, he has 41 carries, and he's averaging 6 yards per carry. Spencer Ware, the former Seahawks running back, has 41 carries, and with the Kansas City Chiefs, he has 4.9 yards per carry. So really, Kristen Michael is bunched up in this group of guys in the low 40s to mid 40s in terms of carries that are all averaging somewhere between 4.9 and 6.3 yards per carry. If any one of those guys, and Kristen Michael could be in the position to do that, starts to increase his carries, will there be more yards? Yes. Will there be more touchdowns? Maybe. But the yards per carry that, could very well go down. Only Jamal Charles is the only guy I could think of in the NFL who's averaged 5 yards per carry pretty much every season, is in maybe one of the top 10 in NFL history in yards per carry. And right now in Kristen Michael's career, he's averaging a really nice 4.8 yards per carry, but he's only carried the ball. How many more times can we see carry? I don't know. We're going to find out. It sounds like a Stephen King podcast. Am I right? Is anyone still listening? So he's only had 151 rushing attempts in his career, which is, barely half a season to some guys, and maybe not in the NFL anymore, but, that's a lot. That's not a lot of carries. And so he's only 151. What's going to happen now with Kristen Michael becoming the lead back? We've seen really good things out of him against the Jets, of course, and against, in limited carries before that. But I wouldn't be surprised to see him, take a few more, have a few more hard knocks. We also saw that he fumbled. He had the key fumble against the Rams that ended the game essentially for the Seattle Seahawks. So he's got to take care of that. The Jets defense, though, they aren't very good against the pass, having allowed 9.7 yards per attempt with Darrelle Revis. I made this joke, and it was such a good joke. It should go in the annals, the halls, the Hall of Fame. Listen, Revis Island, more like Revis Continent. Revis Continent. And so 9.7 yards per pass attempt. That being said, the Jets rushing defense with Muhammad Wilkerson and Sheldon Richardson and Leonard Williams, third in rushing yards allowed, third in rushing touchdowns allowed, and third in yards per carry allowed, allowing just 3.3 yards per carry on the ground. Kristen Michael, this might be his toughest test against a run defense yet, and the Seahawks may rely heavily on him out the gate. That being said, they did add C.J. Spiller this week, with C.J. Prosise perhaps not being ready still and may not be ready for a little bit more longer. Even though Prosise is a full participant in practice, it's possible that he's out there practicing the whole time, but that his broken hand is still not fully healed and he's just not able to catch passes. And that's what they drafted C.J. Prosise out of Notre Dame to do, which was block on third down and catch passes. And so if he can't do that, that would explain why C.J. Spiller was brought into the fold. Spiller had his best season with the Buffalo Bills in 2012, gaining 1,700 yards from scrimmage. The next year he was okay, 4.6 yards per carry, 933 rushing yards, but only 2 touchdowns and a big decrease from where he was the year before. The season after that, injuries affected him. He was down to 3.8 yards per carry. He signs a contract last year with the New Orleans Saints, and he averages 3.1 yards per rushing attempt. He did catch 34 passes, and that's probably what the Seahawks would bring him in here to do, which is the same thing that Prosise would do. But I don't think that Spiller, he can probably just come in right away and play, but I don't think that Spiller does much to affect Kristen Michael's output because they are essentially different positions, the first and second down running back and the third down running back. If Kristen Michael loses any carries this week, it would be to Alex Collins, the rookie out of Arkansas, but Collins not super effective in the preseason. A lot of fans wanting undrafted free agent Troy Maine Pope to win that job over Collins. And he has had 6 carries for just 12 yards so far this season, being active for 2 games, 2 catches for 19 yards as well on Collins' resume. But it's really going to be coming down to Kristen Michael here over the next few weeks as the Seahawks face the really good defense, the run defense, that is, of the New York Jets. If Russell Wilson is able to start pushing out down the ball downfield with Doug Baldwin and open up that passing game, there should be more room for Christine Michael to run through, of course, and that'll help. The following week, after they get a bye, Thomas Rawls probably won't be back. So, but after they get a bye, if everything's a little bit more healthy overall, they will face the Atlanta Falcons with Dan Quinn, who is currently the number one offense in the NFL, number one in points, number one in yards, number one in net yards per pass attempt, and number 4 in yards per carry. But defensive Dan at 28th in points allowed, and 30th in yards allowed, and 31st in passing yards allowed, and 26th in yards per carry allowed, as they've given up 31 to the Bucs, 28 to the Raiders, and 32 to the Saints. So there should be a lot of opportunities for the Seahawks offense in that week against the Falcons, though it'll be a nice test for their defense. And then, of course, another game for Christian Michael probably is he could be starting against the Arizona Cardinals, and that defense still really stout against the pass, as they are second in net yards per pass attempt allowed and 6th in passing yards allowed, but 29th in rushing yards allowed and 27th in yards per carry at 4.8. So this is going to be a really tough test this week against the Jets for Christian Michael, but after the bye week, he gets 2 really cupcake opponents there in terms of rushing defense. And then the week after that, if Christian Michael is still starting, the Seahawks will be facing off against the New Orleans Saints. Of course, the Saints had the worst defense in NFL history last season. Have they gotten better? Yeah. Are they still the worst? Probably. 31st in points allowed, 31st in yards allowed, 28th in net yards per pass attempts allowed, 32nd in rushing yards allowed, and 30th in rushing yards per carry allowed at 5. So if you're listening to this for fantasy football purposes and you're wondering what the future of Christian Michael looks like, I would say that, just from the standpoint that there aren't very many number 1 backs anymore, I would start him against the Jets. Then the next week they get a bye, so you get that. But then the 3 weeks after that, Falcons, Cardinals, and Saints, I think you're going to see Christian Michael, if he's the number 1 back, and if he's playing like he has recently, I think you're going to see Christian Michael perhaps put up 300 to 400 yards in those 3 games alone. He could be at that time pushing 700 total rushing yards on the season, and Christian Michael may be on his way to a 1,000-yard season right now as he's headed for free agency next year. What the Seahawks do at that point is anybody's guess, but it's definitely a long way coming. That's either a sentence or the name of the new Nicholas Sparks novel. Am I right about that? Kenneth Arthur here for Field Goals. You're listening to Seaside Chats, and I don't know why, but thank you for doing that. Christian Michael, good play the 3 following weeks after the bye, perhaps a tough matchup this week. Not expecting to see much out of Spiller, Procise, or Alex Collins, though if Procise comes back healthy, it might be good for some catches in a couple weeks here.